First, I'd like to welcome all of our attendees to the Windshire Group's Ask the Expert series, How to Leverage the Digital Revolution in Early Stage Companies, with our special guest from the Court Square Group. My name is Jen Bardsley, and I'll be serving as your moderator for today's webinar. I currently serve as the account manager slash operations manager for the Windshire Group. So I would like to note that the views expressed in this webinar are those of the panelists. It's for informational purposes only. It's not intended as legal or regulatory advice. And to introduce our panelists, we have Dr. James Blackwell, who's president and principal consultant for the Windshire Group, which was founded in 2011. The Windshire Group accelerates development and manufacturing for commercializing therapies and provides quality expertise. Dr. Blackwell has been a leading industry consultant for more than 15 years. And we also have Keith Parent, who is a founder and CEO of Court Square Group. He leads the company and the vision for using IT as a strategic enabler for life science companies from preclinical all the way to manufacturing.
The webinar today really is the marriage of the user requirements for small companies and the marriage of that and the IT structure and organization of the company. It's a very important factor. And why is this important? This is very important for small companies because it's important for them to improve their operational efficiency. People spend less time looking for stuff, and it speeds up your business processes. And you want to facilitate decision making. You want to be able to access the most current and correct information, and it increases organizational value. A disorganized information with their information all over the place can kill a deal. We've seen that happen. Due diligence and data rooms need to be well designed and populated with good information to facilitate deal making. So that can be very important to small companies. And you're creating very valuable information. And this will be important later for your regulatory filings and for compliance needs, and for your technical people who want to access and understand the history in terms of what's happening within the organization. So this helps you avoid compliance issues later, patient privacy laws, health authority issues, or potentially even SEC violations. And also it creates a more satisfied workforce. Studies have shown people are happier when they're dealing with environments that are well organized and they're able to work efficiently. Nobody wants to be in a cumbersome, inefficient, time-wasting environment.
Another question is, we are evolving from R&D to clinical and know we need to start working in a qualified environment and use validated applications. How can we start with a simple solution that will grow with our company?
So I'm going to handle this one, James, if you don't mind. The concept of qualified environment, let's just define a couple things for people, because you may or may not know it. If you're an early stage company and you're coming out of a lab, you may have heard the words qualified and validated and have a thought about what they mean. But the reality is, when we look at any system that's out there, you can't have a validated system unless it's in qualified infrastructure or qualified systems, parts of that system. So how do we maintain a qualified environment? A lot of that's through change control. We have to have proper change control, understanding that you have control over your environment. If we're going into a cloud environment, there's public clouds and there's private clouds. How are they maintaining compliance? What is your responsibility in that? Ultimately, you are responsible for your data. Regardless of who your vendors are, you have to understand how you do vendor management. You have to understand how you qualify those vendors and make sure that they've got the right systems in place to deal with that data. And you have to have SOPs around how you're dealing with all of that. You can certainly qualify a public cloud vendor, but you have to know what are the risks around that. And you're going to have risk ratings and things like that around the vendors you work with. All of this can be done. It's understanding how to do that. Most IT firms that you're going to deal with don't understand a lot of that. Once we've qualified both our vendors and our environment, whether it's software or hardware, we can then go to validate the applications. Can you go to the next slide, Jenny? So when we validate, here's some terms you may have heard or are familiar with: IQ, OQ, and PQ. Typically, once we've qualified the infrastructure and the operating systems underneath, we're just saying that we've installed them based on the way the vendors that we're buying those from recommend that they get installed. when we're looking at these specific applications, typically it's based on the user requirements for the system we're putting in place. On one of the earlier slides that we put up, James had talked about the different levels, and under each one of those levels, we had lots of different applications there. Well, each one of those applications has its own user requirements for those applications. We need to make sure that when we're looking at an application, we're validating that it's installed correctly, we're validating that it's operating the way that it's supposed to be operating, and that it's going to perform the way we think it's going to perform. So putting together user requirements, putting together the scripts that tie back to those requirements, and then generating the trace matrix showing that we've actually tested it against that is so important. Now, in an environment where you're going to have a lot of laboratory equipment, things like that, you may actually have different types of things where you have process validation, and you're looking at a whole different stuff. Right now, we're just talking about computer systems validation for these things, but there's lots of different types of validation across the board. James, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just like to say it's important to understand which systems will need validation and qualification and which don't. Again, back to that idea of keeping it simple and the level of validation and qualification it's needed. You can use a risk-based approach. If you don't have that expertise in-house, reach out to get it. Again, Keith, we don't want to scare folks. So for smaller companies, for the first IND, there are ways to keep this simple, but you need to be aware of it and need to understand which of those things are important for you. Sometimes Excel spreadsheets, people are using those because they have them, but they're starting to use those things, for example, for compliant needs, and it's not the proper tool, and it creates problems later for organizations.
I'll talk about a recent incident that happened to us. We were just on a call recently, working with a company that was out there, and they've been around for a very long time. They're doing an IND, and they're going out, and they've done some clinical trials. And up until this point, they were using their own systems. They had their data. They were having problems finding data. When I first started talking to them, they were talking about that they had lots of data and they were doing stuff, but they really didn't think they needed what we were talking about yet. All of a sudden, they got a call from the FDA. The FDA came in and wanted to see their data. After that initial call with the data, they wanted to call them again, and now they wanted to do the systems where the data was actually stored. All of a sudden, we got a call specifically to say, "Can you help us? Can we put this in a way?" Those are all things that we live and breathe with. So I think those are things. James and I work together on a number of opportunities where we're sitting with the customer. James's knowledge of the actual scientific aspects and our knowledge of the IT portion of that fit hand in glove and enable us to help that client do that risk-based approach that James has been talking about.